Hello, I'm Amanda Walker, and welcome to Inside America, a show that brings you insight and analysis of the biggest issues facing the United States right now. In today's episode, falling out with the neighbors. Out of all of Donald Trump's surprise policies since he became president, picking a fight with Canada is perhaps the most baffling.
They've taken a lot of money out of our country, and now we're taking it all back.
His tariffs threaten a decades-long friendship between the two nations and have caused economic instability on both sides of the border. Coming up, we speak to some of the hundreds of thousands of Canadians who call the U.S. home.
Canadians love America, Americans love Canada, and it's unfortunate to see this being deteriorated.
And we talk to a former U.S. ambassador to Canada about how bad things have become.
U.S. relations with Canada are the worst in modern history. There's nothing like it, really, across the board. And it's largely a creation of one man, Donald Trump.
So when Donald Trump won the election, it's fair to say there were many nations around the world looking on a little nervously, concerned about what this might mean for their relationship with the US. At the time, though, Canada probably wasn't one of them. The two countries have enjoyed a rock-steady relationship diplomatically, militarily, and most importantly, as deeply integrated trading partners. So a year on, what has gone so spectacularly wrong? Since taking office in January, Donald Trump has picked plenty of fights. The least likely and arguably least popular is with America's northern neighbour. Canada, a long-time ally, has found itself in a battle with its closest trading partner. Even before taking office, Donald Trump started needling then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Truth Social, calling him governor of the great state of Canada. Trump has repeatedly expressed his desire to annex the country.
I think Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state.
Those comments have largely been framed around trade. In one of his first actions as president, Trump announced 25% tariffs on worldwide imports, including Canada, kicking off a months-long series of exemptions and delays and promises of retaliation from Canada.
Canadians are reasonable and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake.
Canadian ice hockey fans echoed their leader's sentiment, booing the US national anthem as relations reached what was surely a record low. After a fractious Trudeau-Trump phase, spring saw the entry of a new leader. Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney has a history of leading Canada through rocky economic times. He delivered a eulogy for the US-Canada relationship in a televised address the day after the tariffs were announced.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations, is over. We must fundamentally reimagine our economy. We will need to ensure that Canada can succeed in a drastically different world.
As a 50% tariff on nearly all foreign steel and aluminium takes effect, Canadians take matters into their own hands. Boycotting travel across the border, summer tourism hits an all-time low.
And we'll see what happens.
Canada's new leader does make it to Washington, D.C., though, for a highly anticipated Oval Office meeting in which he deftly handles the 51st state question.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale.
After a relatively civil encounter, tensions appear to ease until the Canadian province of Ontario drops this bombshell.
High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars.
This anti-tariff ad drew from a 1987 radio address by former President Ronald Reagan. It was aired in the US, hitting a nerve with Trump, who announced an end to all negotiations with Canada. The ad was eventually pulled amid apologies from Prime Minister Carney. In the recent Baseball World Series, Canada was ultimately defeated by the US. But despite that and all the animosity at the top, Canadians in Washington, D.C. seem intent on living up to the national reputation for niceness.
If I could send a message to other Americans living in the US, like, we were glad to be your neighbors for the last 150-somewhat years. We still want to be, and we'll work with you and for you and along with you like we did in the past years.
It's a bummer. It bums me out because I think that in order to keep happiness and wealth and peace, we need to get along with Canada. And Canadians love America, Americans love Canada, and it's unfortunate to see this being deteriorated.
It's definitely very frightening considering that, Canada and the U.S. have enjoyed good relations for, longer than I've been alive. And it's definitely scary to think about, well, if this relationship doesn't last or if these comments continue, what's going to happen to that sort of relationship?
So that's the view of Canadians here in the US, but many Americans are just as concerned. James Blanchard served as the US ambassador to Canada in the 90s, and as the governor of Michigan, he oversaw a strong economic relationship between that state and its northern neighbors. I asked him to describe how Americans generally see Canada.
Well, normally they're viewed as our best friend, Canada, US. Best friend, ally, partner, critical for trade, energy, tourism, friendship, integrated economy, integrated movement of people, good relations. Every once in a while, the politicians would nitpick a little issue, like dairy or something, or lumber, and the lawyers would make money off of it, and it would get resolved. But basically, it's a partnership that works. It's been the envy of the world. And it's tragic to see what's happened now. And I've followed this for at least, 60 years or longer.
So now we're talking about a relationship in crisis. Did you ever imagine that you'd be hearing those words, dealing with that reality?
No, I think relations, U.S. relations with Canada, are the worst in modern history. There's nothing like it, really, across the board. And it's largely a creation of one man, Donald Trump, who, for whatever reason, has decided he doesn't like the Canadians, or he's had advisors who are largely conspiratorial types and fools telling him things and getting him all upset. And so he slaps on tariffs that are needless. He doesn't describe the facts at all. The facts don't matter. And so the Canadians are trying to adjust to that. They do have a new leader. He probably does owe his election to Trump, actually, Mark Carney, and I think he's weathering it as well as anybody could. He's the adult in the room, and he knows it.
Let's talk a bit about the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, because previous Prime Minister, obviously Justin Trudeau, things were fractious. There was a bit of a war of words at one point, calling him governor, for example. But Mark Carney has a strategy here, doesn't he? He seems to know how to handle Donald Trump. What do you make of his performance so far as Prime Minister?
Well, from what I can tell, it's been good. I'm not up in Ottawa or Toronto or Canada to see. My guess is the Canadian people are waiting to see. They may have unrealistic expectations for Mark Carney, but I think he's probably as suited as anybody to deal with this. I mean, he was head of the Bank of England. He was the head of Bank of Canada. He's a student of history. He knows not to overreact. I think Trump respects bankers more than most people. And so that's probably a good thing. But I think Mr. Trump has people telling him things that simply aren't true. The problem with Donald Trump in his second term isn't just that it's Donald Trump or an older Donald Trump and maybe a more deranged Donald Trump. But he's got advisors who really aren't qualified to be advisors. He couldn't recruit really good people this time around. Most of the good people he had wouldn't work for him. They didn't support him. They didn't think he was fit to be president. So now he's got these kooks, cranks, and misfits telling him things and basically feeding him with misinformation about Canada. I heard the Vice President, J.D. Vance, say, the Canadians have treated us very badly these last few decades. I have no idea what he's talking about.
Tariffs have been the real cornerstone of this battle, or it's a kind of a one-sided battle. It seems that Canada's not interested in getting in the fight. But how would you characterize the tariff situation and what impact could it have for both countries?
Well, that's a good question. First, the animosity was more making fun of Canada and calling them 51st state and saying we need nothing from them. And then his advisors saying they've been ripping us off and you know, we get nothing we need from them, and on and on and on and on. Tariffs is a sub-part of that problem, but it's really the attitude of Donald Trump that's been the problem. Tariffs are, you know, they're a sales tax, basically. They're a hidden tax on the American people, the American consumer, the American businesses. That's what they are. Trump has got himself convinced that other countries pay the tariffs, and he's getting all this money from other countries. But with Canada, we now have a 50% tax on steel and aluminum. We have an integrated market with Canada. In fact, until recently, the head of the United Steelworkers was a Torontonian, a Canadian. That's going to add costs to the auto companies, like General Motors, at least $1 billion a year. Ford Motor, probably at least $800 million a year. It's going to raise car prices, raise the price of cars, leads to probably layoffs. So it harms our industry. Michigan, in particular, my home state, has more to gain and more to lose by working with Canada.
And what do you make of him saying that this isn't a trade war, it's actually a drugs war?
Well, that's not even true with Canada. I mean, the fentanyl issue was less than 1% from Canada. We send more illegal guns up to Canada than any fentanyl that we ever received from Canada. So it's absurd.
So what do you think's behind all this?
Personally, I think that, Donald Trump is a perfect study for those that specialize in abnormal psychology. I mean, he is a malignant narcissist. So he has an insatiable demand to be loved, and it can never be satisfied. And if you criticize him, you're the enemy. I just think he's angry at the world, like RFK Jr. is, angry at the world. He was never accepted in Manhattan. Now he's in Florida, he's accepted among a few people there. I think he's mad at the world. He wakes up and he's angry. He wants to be who to be angry at. One day it's, we want Greenland or Panama or the British or the English or the French. But lately now he's getting along fine with the UK. But he's talked about the EU as if they're the enemy. He actually made up the story the EU was formed to take advantage of the US. That was one of the great developments of post-war Europe, is the EU.
Should we be concerned about a trajectory here? I mean, it's a war of words and trade at the moment, but could this ever escalate? Do you ever see that as a possibility?
I don't know. I doubt that. I think every advisor to every foreign leader is telling him, just tell Trump how great he is. Just tell him how wonderful he is. Just tell him he should get the Nobel Peace Prize. Just tell him how fabulous he is. And you know what?
Is that the right strategy?
Well, it seems to work. And what's interesting is he knows in one sense, he knows he's being played. On the other sense, I think he loves it. He can't resist it. He figures whoever's talking to him is smart enough to tell him that.
And just finally, what should Canada be doing in response to all of this? What are they thinking? What's the conversation on the late night shows there, and where do they turn?
I don't know. I don't know what to say. I was ambassador there. I loved it. It was a critical time. And we had NAFTA, we had open skies, we had the Quebec referendum. I mean, it was a touch and go time, but the goodwill was always, always, always there, the foundation. And that's been shattered somewhat, and I don't know how we'll repair. What should they do? Hang in there, hope that President Trump finds other people to worry about and comes to his senses that you really need, regardless of what he says or what I say. The truth is we're living next to each other. We're going to have to get along. That's the way it is. That's geography in this case is destiny.
Well, that was James Blanchard, the former US ambassador to Canada. Well, joining me now on a very windy Washington, D.C. rooftop is Drew Fagan, who's professor at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy in Toronto. He's also a former head of policy planning in Canada's Foreign Affairs Department. I'm also joined by Victoria Churchill, who's a reporter for the Daily Mail covering Capitol Hill and US politics. So, Victoria, let's talk about the Supreme Court. They've signalled scepticism about the legality of broad tariffs. Is this policy in jeopardy overall?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the court actually decides to do. But I think what we've seen here in Washington over the past couple weeks is just the three branches of government at work. The president has signaled policies that he wants, particularly on tariff, particularly when it comes to Canada. The Senate voted, 4 Senate Republicans sided with Democrats to voice their opposition to the tariffs. So they were able to pass that legislation out of the Senate. It's probably not going to go anywhere in the House, but again, it's kind of that signal that they were able to send. Those were Senator Collins and Murkowski from Alaska and Maine, and then as well as both of Kentucky senators, Senator Rand Paul, as well as Senator Mitch McConnell, who's retiring. So, those senators were able to voice their opposition, even though they were members of the president's party. And then again, the three branches of government, they were designed to be equal. And so we've got the executive, the legislative, and now the Supreme Court as the judicial branch is weighing in as well.
So Drew, this skepticism generally, where do you think it's headed? What's your best guess? And how's it being viewed in Canada?
There's not a lot of faith, I think, in the American political system in the context of both the rhetoric of President Trump and the actions of President Trump. I think it's important also to note that the Supreme Court is looking at one strategy that he's used. They're looking less at another strategy that he's used in the context of tariffs imposed on Canada. So for us, for Canada, for the Canadian government, fundamentally it's about a negotiation, and one that we didn't expect to be having even with this administration. Let's remember we had an update to NAFTA in President Trump's first term. That negotiation it was difficult, it turned out okay. This is something entirely different in the context of Canada's relationship with the United States in terms of trade and even beyond, given some of the claims President Trump has made and some of the apparent demands he's making.
Yeah, it's become a really negative back and forth. I want to talk a bit more about this ad, the Reagan ad that we referenced earlier in the program. Victoria, can you just underscore to our viewers out there why this irritated Donald Trump so much?
Well, I think it irritated the Donald Trump because this is actually a debate that's been going on the American right for quite some time, but particularly in the Trump era, this idea of protectionism. A lot of traditional conservatives from all around D.C., they're more free market, they're more free trade kinds of policy thinkers. And so the fact that this is an attack on Trump from the right, that's definitely something that rubbed him the wrong way. But again, this is a debate that is being had not only on the policy side, but also more in the think tanks and kind of, academia, ivory towers, both here in DC and as well as other institutions all over the country. And, I'm sure all over the world is what does actual conservative policy look like? And is that rooted in free markets as it has historically been?
So standing up to Trump, red rag to a bull, was it a good move?
What was really striking in my mind about the reaction to those ads was the accusation that Canadians were interfering with American sovereignty. One of the things that's remarkable about the U.S. system is it's a bit of a free-for-all. You can lobby on Capitol Hill, you can lobby on the states, you can advertise. The American system is very open to other countries in a way that other countries aren't open to the United States in the same way. But the accusation that we were interfering was extraordinary to my mind. That's what the United States system is all about.
But also interfering with sovereignty is something that's been happening in a different direction.
100%. And that was not lost on Canadians as well. There's a history of a U.S. desire to annex Canada going back to before the Canada existed, but we haven't seen it in any sort of substantial way for 100 years. The issue for Canada really was to have free trade and political autonomy, and to walk that line for a country that's not a small economy, 10th biggest in the world, but a pipsqueak compared to the United States. We've always been able to do that. This administration thinks differently.
Yeah, and with supply chains being more integrated, auto, energy especially,
100%.
does this make any sense for American businesses?
Well, the challenge for Canada in the context of the U.S. economy is the relationship is bilateral. But it's asymmetrical. 25% of our GDP is dependent on the United States. About 2% of U.S. GDP is dependent on Canada, even though the trade is balanced, despite what the president says. Roughly, the trade is balanced. So, no, it doesn't make sense in the context of the U.S. economy, but the impact on Canada is so much bigger than the impact on the United States anyway.
Let's talk a bit about Prime Minister Carney, because he's come in and done pretty well so far, if you regard well as kind of courting Trump and managing to handle him in a certain way. Do you think that is going to stay? Do you think they'll be able to maintain a decent relationship when Carney has said very clearly that obviously Canada's interests are his priority?
Sure. I mean, I want to actually think back to before Carney was elected, that even Pierre Poilievre, even being the more conservative candidate, he said that he was willing to stand up to Trump. And so, that was, I think, an interesting play, because some American conservatives, it seemed like, were cheering Poilievre on, that they were hoping that he was the one that Trump was going to be working with instead of Carney. Obviously, Carney is the one that won that election. But I think Trump really recognizes that so many key voices in his Republican Party that may not always agree with them, some of whom I mentioned previously, but particularly Collins and Murkowski, because they represent communities that are very intertwined with Canada. He knows that those voices are important, and for Republicans to pass legislation, he needs to listen to them, even though he might not always like to listen to those voices.
Okay, and Drew, what do you think Canadians want? Do they want someone who's going to be a tough guy, stand up to Trump? They want someone who's going to appease him? Can Mark Carney continue to do both?
So Canadians have confidence in Mark Carney. He's a political neophyte. But we've known Mark Carney from his time as governor of the Bank of Canada, before he was governor of the Bank of England. So he's somebody that Canadians respect and have confidence in. But at the end of the day, it's going to be about results.
I want to go back to this notion of why Trump is picking this fight. Let's take a look at a couple of polls. So the first one on tariffs shows that very few people see Canada as an adversary. And let's take a look at another one. It shows that despite the Trump administration's best efforts, most people see a good relationship with Canada. So Victoria, the public will is not there. Why keep picking this fight?
I mean, I think throughout the past 10 years when Trump has really occupied headlines, I think he's always shown that his bark is at times tougher than his bite. And he wants to be the big man in the castle. Just look at what he's done with the White House, right? He's dressed it up like Mar-a-Lago. He wants to feel like the man in charge. He wants to have all of these global leaders come to him, come to his, court, for lack of a better comparison, and come to it on his terms. And so I think a lot of the times he threatens very high things, but I think intrinsically him and his advisors, they know that they're going to walk a lot of that back, but they want to come out the most aggressive.
It's a broad strategy, a tough guy strategy. Is it going to work with Canada?
It's different with Canada because of the intimacy of the ties and the emotion, if you like, of the history. So he was able to do, agreements with other countries, big countries, the EU, Japan, South Korea, that were to his advantage. Those countries decided to end this negotiation and hope that down the road things will rebalance. He wasn't able to do that with China. The challenge with regard to Canada, again, is the whole context of it. And I would note that the president's different, I think, than other presidents in the way he thinks about Canada. I think he actually, in his heart, would like to annex Canada. That would be historic for him, to increase the borders. Other presidents have analyzed this and said, we have a good relationship. Why would you roil the waters by talking about anything? It wouldn't have occurred to them. That was ancient history. He thinks differently. It's a little like renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. He thinks in terms of headlines like that.
Will US-Canada relations ever be the same again?
So that is the fundamental question, because the Prime Minister Carney, has said it's over in terms of what we had, that the continuing integration of the two economies, had come to an end, he is saying, and we have to pivot to other markets. That's the fundamental question for Canada. It's hard to see right now a turning back to what we had. It's possible in the medium term. It's not impossible, but certainly the Prime Minister has concluded, and right now Canadians seem to agree that we need to look elsewhere.
Yeah, and we can feel the chill in the air up here. The question is, will the snowbirds be heading south this winter? We'll have to see. That'll be a true sign of where relations are. Victoria, Drew, thank you both so much for your time. So that's it for this episode of Inside America. Do join us next time. Thanks for watching.